Welcome back to Chapter 5 of Diagon Alley. I am starting back on page 75, about a third of the way down. They've just entered the leaky cauldron and everyone has spotted Harry Potter. A pale young man made his way forward very nervously. One of his eyes was twitching. "Professor Quirrell," said Hagrid. "Harry, Professor Quirrell would be one of your teachers at Hogwarts." Potter," stammered Professor Quirrell, grasping Harry's hand. "Can't tell you how pleased I am to meet you." "What sort of magic do you teach, Professor Quirrell?" Defence against the dark arts," muttered Professor Quirrell, as though he'd rather not think about it. Not that you need it, Potter?" He laughed nervously. "You'll be getting all your equipment, I suppose. I've got to pick up a book on vampires myself." He looked terrible at the very thought. But the others wouldn't let Professor Quirrell keep Harry to himself. It took almost 10 minutes to get away from them all. At last, Hagrid managed to make himself heard over the babble. "Must get on. Lots to buy. Come on, Harry." Doris Crockford shook Harry's hand one last time, and Hagrid led them through the bar and out into a small walled courtyard where there was nothing but a dustbin and a few weeds. Hagrid grinned at Harry. "Told you, didn't I? Told you were famous. Even Professor Quirrell was trembling to meet you. Mind you, he's usually trembling." "Is he always that nervous?" "Oh yeah, poor bloke. Brilliant mind. He was fine while he was studying out of books, but then he took a year off to get some first-hand experience. They say he met vampires in the Black Forest, and there was a nasty bit of trouble with the old hag. Never been the same since. Scared of the students, scared of his own subject. Now, where's me umbrella?" Vampires? Hags? Harry's head was swimming. Hagrid, meanwhile, was counting bricks in the wall above the dustbin. "3 up, 2 across," he muttered. "Right, stand back, Harry." He tapped the wall 3 times with the point of his umbrella. The brick he had touched quivered. It wriggled. In the middle, a small hole appeared. It grew wider and wider. A second later, they were facing an archway, large enough even for Hagrid, an archway onto a cobbled street which twisted and turned out of sight. "Welcome," said Hagrid, "to Diagon Alley." He grinned at Harry's amazement. They stepped through the archway. Harry looked quickly over his shoulder and saw the archway shrink instantly back into a solid wall. The sun shone brightly on a stack of cauldrons outside the nearest shop. Cauldrons, all sizes, copper, brass, pewter, silver, self-stirring, collapsible, said a sign hanging over them. "Yeah, you'll be needing one," said Hagrid, "but we got to get your money first." Harry wished he had about 8 more eyes. He turned his head in every direction as they walked up the street, trying to look at everything at once. The shops, the things outside them, the people doing their shopping. A plump woman outside an apothecary's was shaking her head as they passed, saying, "Dragon liver, 16 sickles an ounce." They're mad. So think where the word apothecary comes from. Have you heard it before? I have seen it crop up in movies and TV shows, and I've seen them in shops selling apothecary jars. So think if you know that word and what it could possibly mean. A low soft hooting came from a dark shop with a sign saying, "Aelop's Ale Emporium, tawny, screech, barn, brown and snowy." Several boys of about Harry's age had their noses pressed against a window with broomsticks in it. "Look," Harry heard one of them say. "The new Nimbus 2000, fastest ever." There were shops selling robes, shops selling telescopes, and strange silver instruments Harry had never seen before. Windows stacked with barrels of bat spleens and eel's eyes, tottering piles of spell books, quills and rolls of parchment, potion bottles, globes of the moon. "Gringotts," said Hagrid. They had reached a snowy white building which towered over the other little shops. Standing beside it, burnished bronze doors, wearing a uniform of scarlet and gold, was... "Yeah, that's a goblin," said Hagrid quietly as they walked up the white stone steps towards him. The goblin was about a head shorter than Harry. He had a swarthy, clever face, a pointed beard, and, Harry noticed, very long fingers and feet. He bowed as they walked inside. Now they were facing a second pair of doors. "Silver this time," with words engraved upon them. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there. Like I said, you'd be mad to try and rob it, said Hagrid. A pair of goblins bowed them through the silver doors, and they were in a vast marble hall. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, scribbling in large ledgers, weighing coins on brass scales, examining precious stones through eyeglasses. There were too many doors to count leading off the hall, and yet more goblins were showing people in and out of these. Hagrid and Harry made for the counter. Morning, said Hagrid to a free goblin. We've come to take some money out of Mr. Potter's safe. You have his key, sir? Got it here somewhere, said Hagrid, and he started emptying his pockets onto the counter, scattering a handful of mouldy dog biscuits over the goblin's book of numbers. The goblin wrinkled his nose. Harry watched the goblin on their right, weighing a pile of rubies as big as glowing coals. Got it, said Hagrid at last, holding up a tiny golden key. The goblin looked at it closely. That seems to be in order. And I've also got a letter here from Professor Dumbledore, said Hagrid importantly, throwing out his chest. It's about the you-know-what in Vault 713. Now, I do notice every time Hagrid talks about Professor Dumbledore, how proud he always is. He's talked about it in the past. He didn't like it when Dursley said something negative about Dumbledore, and his chest always puffs out with pride when he's on a special mission for him. So think about the relationship that Professor Dumbledore and Hagrid must have. The goblin read the letter carefully. Very well, he said, handing it back to Hagrid. I will have someone take you down to both vaults. Griphook! Griphook was yet another goblin. Once Hagrid had crammed all the dog biscuits back inside his pockets, he and Harry followed Griphook towards one of the doors leading off the hall. What's the you-know-what in Vault 713? Harry asked. Can't tell you that, said Hagrid mysteriously. Very secret. Hogwarts business. Dumbledore's trusted me. More than my job's worth, to tell you that. Griphook held the door open for them. Harry, who had expected more marble, was surprised. They were in a narrow stone passageway lit with flaming torches. It sloped steeply downwards, and there were little railway tracks on the floor. Griphook whistled, and a small cart came hurtling up the track towards them. They climbed in, Hagrid with some difficulty, and they were off. At first, they just hurtled through a maze of twisting passages. Harry tried to remember left, right, left, middle fork, right, left, but it was impossible. The rattling cart seemed to know its own way because Griphook wasn't steering. Harry's eyes stung as the cold air rushed past them, but he kept them wide open. Once, he thought he saw a burst of fire at the end of a passage and twisted around to see if it was a dragon. But too late. They plunged even deeper, passing an underground lake where huge stalactites and stalagmites grew from the ceiling and floor. I never know, Harry called to Hagrid over the noise of the cart. What's the difference between a stalagmite and a stalactite? Now, do you know the difference? Stalagmite's got an M in it, said Hagrid. And don't ask me questions just now. I think I'm going to be sick. So, my tip is I always remember the difference between stalagmite and stalactite because a stalactite has to hold on tight to the ceiling. That's how I remember. He did look very green, and when the cart stopped, at last, beside a small door in the passage wall, Hagrid got out and had to lean against the wall to stop his knees trembling. Griphook unlocked the door. A lot of green smoke came billowing out, and as it cleared, Harry gasped. Inside were mounds of gold coins, columns of silver, heaps of little bronze nuts. All yours, smiled Hagrid. All Harry's? It was incredible. The Dursleys couldn't have known about this, or they'd have had it from him faster than blinking. How often they had complained how much Harry cost them to keep, and all the time there had been a small fortune belonging to him buried deep under London. Hagrid helped Harry pile some of it into a bag. "The gold ones are galleons," he explained. 17 silver sickles to a galleon and 29 nuts to a sickle. It's easy enough. Right, that should be enough for a couple of terms. We'll keep the rest safe for you." He turned to Griphook. "Vault 713 now, please. And can we go more slowly?" "One speed only," said Griphook. They were going even deeper now and gathering speed. The air became colder and colder as they hurtled round tight corners. They were rattling over an underground ravine, and Harry leant over the side to try and see what was down at the dark bottom. But Hagrid groaned and pulled him back by the scruff of his neck. Vault 713 had no keyhole. "Stand back," said Griphook importantly. He stroked the door gently. With one of his long fingers, and it simply melted away. "If anyone but a Gringotts goblin tried that, they'd be sucked through the door and trapped in there," said Griphook. "How often do you check to see if anyone's inside?" Harry asked. "About once every 10 years, said Griphook with a rather nasty grin. Something really extraordinary had to be inside this top security vault, Harry was sure, and he leant forward eagerly, expecting to see fabulous jewels at the very least. But at first he thought it was empty. Then he noticed a grubby little package wrapped up in brown paper lying on the floor. Hagrid picked it up and tucked it deep inside his coat. Harry longed to know what it was, but he knew better than to ask. Come on, back in this infernal cart, and don't talk to me on the way back. It's best if I keep my mouth shut, said Hagrid. So I'm wondering why he needs to keep his mouth shut. Is it so he doesn't spill any information on what is in the package, or is it so he doesn't throw up everywhere? Which do you think? One wild cart ride later, they stood blinking in the sunlight outside Gringotts. Harry didn't know where to run first, now that he had a bag full of money. He didn't have to know how many galleons there were to a pound to know that he was holding more money than he'd had in his whole life. More money than even Dudley had ever had. Might as well get your uniform, said Hagrid, nodding towards Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Listen, Harry, would you mind if I slipped off for a pick-me-up in the leaky cauldron? I hate them Gringotts carts. He did still look a bit sick, so Harry entered Madame Malkin's shop alone, feeling nervous. Madame Malkin was a squat, smiling witch dressed all in mauve. Have a think about what squat would mean. She was a squat, smiling witch. See if you can create that mental image of Madame Malkin in your head. Hogwarts, dear, she said when Harry started to speak. Got the lot here. Another young man being fitted up just now, in fact. In the back of the shop, a boy with a pale, pointed face was standing on a footstool, while a second witch pinned up his long black robes. Madame Malkin stood Harry on a stool next to him, slipped the long robe over his head and began to pin it to the right length. Hello, said the boy. Hogwarts too? Yes, said Harry. My father's next door buying my books, and mother's up the street looking at wands, said the boy. He had a bored, drawling voice. Then I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one, and I'll smuggle it in somehow. Harry was strongly reminded of Dudley. Have you got your own broom? The boy went on. No, said Harry. Play Quidditch at all? No, Harry said again, wondering what on earth Quidditch could be. I do. Father says it's a crime if I'm not picked to play for my house, and I must say, I agree. Know what house you'll be in yet? No, said Harry, feeling more stupid by the minute. Well, no one really knows until they get there, do they? But I know I'll be in Slytherin. All of our family have been. Imagine being in Hufflepuff. Ugh, I think I'd leave, wouldn't you? Said Harry, wishing he could say something a bit more interesting. I say, look at that man, said the boy suddenly, nodding toward the front window. Hagrid was standing there, grinning at Harry and pointing at 2 large ice creams to show he couldn't come in. "That's Hagrid," said Harry, pleased to know something the boy didn't. "He works at Hogwarts."